All right, well, let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Crafting Excellence, Elevating Your Wine Through Testing. We're excited to have you here with us. My name is Jessica, and I'm the Director of Marketing for AEMTEK. I'll be moderating today's webinar. Just so you all know, today's webinar will be recorded and posted on AEMTEK's YouTube channel, so if you ever want to come back to it, you can find it there. First off, we encourage everyone to participate by asking questions throughout today's presentation. You can submit questions by clicking on the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll stay on after the presentation to go over any questions that came through. AEMTEK Wine Lab is an accredited laboratory in the San Francisco Bay Area, specializing in food, water, juice, and wine quality and safety testing. We'd like to thank the Livermore Valley Winemakers Association and the Tri-Valley Conservatory for collaborating with us to bring you today's webinar. The webinar will be led by Ms. Julie Schreiber and Dr. Florence Wu. Julie is a consulting winemaker in Napa, Sonoma, and the Livermore Valley, who has crafted award-winning wines for esteemed clients like Kenwood Vineyards and Sterling Vineyards, drawing on her culinary background and a master's degree in enology from UC Davis. Dr. Wu earned her PhD in mycology and has extensive experience in analytical method development, sampling methods, microbial contamination control, training and consulting, and environmental monitoring programs. So with that, let's get started. Julie?
Great, thank you. Today's topics are related to lab analysis, and so we will cover the following subjects: the importance of juice and wine testing, what to test and why, when to test, introduction to the testing methods we have at AEMTEK, and how to interpret those results. So we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. The importance of wine testing. What I love to tell people is if it's not measured, you can't manage it. So that's the most important thing is knowledge is power. The key here is we like to standardize the quality parameters. So for example, if you know that you want to have a certain alcohol level on the wine that you're making, you can think about that from when you have the grapes all the way till you finish the wine. So having those parameters just helps you guide your way through the entire process of making wine. It helps you to make decisions to achieve production goals. So maybe you want to have a wine that has a certain acid level, certain alcohol level. Maybe it has to do with the amount of ml bacteria that malic acid, I should say, that you want to have in the finished wine, etc. So all those numbers help you make those types of decisions. In addition, you can detect potential issues early through monitoring. So for example, you're monitoring monthly your VA and free sulfur. You can see if for some reason the free sulfur drops from 1 month to the next. It sort of tells you, hey, at least go make an addition, or it can also tell you to go taste those barrels and just make sure that everything's okay with the wine. So monitoring regularly just helps with that. Avoiding costly expenses to rectify problems. So if you don't do any lab analysis, you can get some surprises, and doing analysis just helps you to make sure those surprises don't happen. You have an idea of what's happening on an ongoing basis. Keeping records. So if you need records for the TTB related to alcohol, or for your taxes or that sort of thing, having those records is very helpful. And you can make continuous improvements in your wines if you monitor. Next slide. What to test and why. So there's a lot of different times within the process that you can monitor your wine or your juice. So we have pre-harvest, we can actually do berry sampling, and we can see when is the optimal time to pick our grapes. We can do pre-fermentation, which would be after we pick the fruit and it's brought into the winery, we do analysis on the must if it's red wine or the juice if it's white. And then we can make decisions about if the targets are hit, or if we need to make sure it's too high and you want to have a lower alcohol in the long run, or maybe you have ideas about the acid level, etc. Those are important to measure prior to fermentation. Primary fermentation, we monitor Brix and temps on a daily basis to see that the fermentations are healthy and going as we expect. Secondary fermentation, this is when you do malolactic fermentation. We're monitoring the conversion of malate to lactate. And that is something where in most wines, we want to go for a full conversion, but in some cases, I'm thinking specifically of Chardonnay. Some people don't want to go through full, they stopped midway. So as you're monitoring it, it allows you to know the status of what's going on with your wine. Maturation, this has more to do with when you're either staying in tank or you're in barrels, and you monitor monthly for VA and free sulfur. And this just allows you to kind of know what's happening in the cellar. If you're aging a Cabernet for 2 years, it's nice to know if there's some kind of VA creep, then you can do something about it. Pre and post bottling, this is when you have the last decisions you make before you are done making the wine, and now it's in the bottle and out to customers. So you think about, is the acid where I want it? Is the tannin where I want it? Is it filterable? There are all sorts of decisions you make prior to bottling, and then some people do analysis after bottling just to make sure that everything turned out as they thought it should. Next slide. Okay, so when to test and why. So again, we'll go back to pre-harvest, and what we're doing is we are sampling the grapes, walking the blocks in the vineyard, and then take a good size sample and check for Brix, pH, TA, malate. You can also go beyond that. There's you can do some of the pre-fermentation analysis if you feel that's helpful. I find that I do that once a week, once I start sampling, just to make that decision about when I'm going to actually pick the fruit, but some people do it on a different rate. So it really depends on the maturity of the fruit. So Sauvignon Blanc maybe is more frequent than maybe Cabernet, but it's nice to have a baseline to know, oh, I sampled it today, it's at 18 Brix. My target is 24. I probably got 3 weeks, something like that. Next is a pre-fermentation analysis. This one is really important, especially the YAN, the yeast assimilable nitrogen, because once the juice starts fermenting, that number doesn't exist anymore. So you really want that information to allow you to know, am I going to have enough nutrients in the juice, or I need to think about an addition during ferment to make sure I have a healthy fermentation. So some of these are related to the health of the fermentation, and some of these are related to the targets we want to hit as far as the alcohol and acid level in the finished wines. Primary fermentation, we monitor the Brix and temps on a daily basis to see how the fermentation is going. Sometimes I will do a mid-ferment check on alcohol and residual sugar to see if I made the correct decision about the alcohol content for the finished wine. So that's possible. Secondary fermentation, this is usually for a red wine after primary fermentation is finished, but in some cases people inoculate and do both at the same time. So during the secondary fermentation, you're monitoring for the conversion of malate to lactate. Monitoring the VA is really important during this time, because a lot of times you'll see the VA creep while you're in that secondary fermentation. Once you've finished the wines, everything is hopefully dry and finished ML. Then usually you transfer into another tank where you've sulfured the wine to make sure the fermentation stops. Then you want to monitor it on a regular basis to make sure you're not seeing any surprises, that the sulfur is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So we check for VA and free sulfur. I know that in some cases people now do low SO2 because they're concerned about that. And then there are other ways you can monitor as well. Pre-bottling. So we're checking heat and cold stability, alcohol, CO2, dissolved oxygen, microbial status, etc. These are all things that we think about prior to going into the bottle to make sure the wine is exactly what we want it to be. And then some people will actually check some of these things post-bottling to make sure, for example, that the filter worked properly on the bottling line. Next slide. So how do we sample properly? It depends on what you're sampling. So if I'm sampling grapes, I frequently will go and walk the block and pull cluster samples. And then I actually take the samples and I squish it myself and make a juice sample. So if you're doing that, you can also submit grapes if you want, and then somebody else does the smushing of the grapes for you. But so with juice, the critical thing is that it will ferment. So we have to make sure that it's stored properly and that it's in a container that the lid is not completely tight, because you don't want this juice to start fermenting. A, because it's really messy, and B, because then your numbers don't mean anything. So it's really important that the sample be cold and that it doesn't ferment, so that the lab gets a pure, fresh sample. If you're sampling tanks versus barrels, or you have one vessel, it's really easy to take one sample and you have the analysis you need. But if you're going to do barrels or multiple T-bins or something like that, you just have to think about, do you want to sample each one individually, or whether you do a composite sample? So that's really important to get a real view of what the wine is doing. And really important to mark the sample with the lot number, the name of your winery, etc., so that you can get the results back. What analysis do you actually need? So there are a list that are available that you could do, like a juice panel or a wine panel, or post-primary malolactic fermentation panel. There are different options, but there's also the ability to check off, I just want one number. You could do that too. But conveying with the lab is really important. And do I have the right volume? So if you're doing certain types of analysis, you need certain amounts of wines. You can see the two different size containers there are important. So next slide. So Florence, your turn.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today to talk about wine testing. It's a fun topic for us. Before I start to talk about testing method, for those who don't know us, briefly introduce AEMTEK. So we have over 20 years of analytical experience. We test food, water, environmental samples, dietary supplement, and wine. And we are ISO 17025 accredited lab, and we do have the technical strength, and we work with consultants like Julie to help the wine testing. We always have a service mentality, and our mission is to provide accurate, fast, and reliable result for our clients. In today's winemaking, using a data-driven approach is the key to achieve top quality and consistency. By collecting precise data and every production stage, from the vineyard to fermentation and aging, winemakers can make smart decisions. Testing data can help to monitor, predict, and control wine outcomes with great accuracy. This approach ensures consistent, high-quality wine and allows for creative innovation. The fermentation and blending tradition with modern technology, data-driven winemaking really helps to craft exceptional wine that can stand out in a competitive market. So we're here to help winemakers to achieve that goal. On the screen is a partial list of the testing service that AEMTEK currently offers. We want to grow with the winemaking industry. I'd like to briefly introduce each category of method that we use in the lab. Those methods are chosen based on careful consideration of the method itself, its performance, and the requirement for wine testing. For alcohol testing, we choose Alkalizer 3001 model that uses a highly alcohol-specific range in the near-infrared spectrum to selectively quantify alcohol content. And this method is in compliance with various acknowledged standards, such as EBC, MABAC, and other organizations. The analytical range is from 0% to 20%, and it has a great repeatability of standard deviation of 0.001%. For other analysis, other chemistry analysis, like acetic acid, there are a couple of methods that one can choose from. After evaluation of the method, we select the enzymatic method. This method involves the use of specific enzymes that catalyze reactions involving the target and allowing for its quantification. The key to enzymatic analysis is the selection of an enzyme that specifically react with your target, whether it's acetic acid or other parameters. By comparing the change in absorbance with the calibration curve created using known concentration of acetic acid, the concentration of the target in the sample can be quantified. And this is the use of internal calibration curve with standard solutions really helps to ensure the sensitivity and specificity. So overall, this method is highly specific, sensitive, and accurate. It avoids the interference from other substance that may be present in the sample. For some other parameters, like the primary amino nitrogen, we choose the colorimetric analysis method, which is a time-tested method. This analysis relies on the reaction between specific reagents and the target that produce a color change. And the colored complex is measured using a spectral photometer. There's also calibration curve that is created using known concentration of standard, and the absorbance value of the standards are plotted against their concentration to create a standard curve. And then the concentration of the target in the sample is determined by comparing its absorbance to the standard curve. This method is also sensitive, specific, and rapid, and also cost-effective. A lot of testing, even the principle is correct. Sometimes human error happens. So to avoid human error, we choose this automatic analyzer. It's the vendor called Speaker. It is an automatic titration that reduces the human error and offers robustness, repeatability, and excellent accuracy. And within the instrument, there are supplies and kits for the enzymatic methods and the colorimetric analysis. For the wine microbiology, we have various tools that can corresponding to different testing needs. For example, if the sample is for a viable yeast count or just rapid microscopy of microbial community, then we use the microscope with different dye to highlight the viable cells. For culture method, we have both manual and automatic method that do the plating. And the plating we can provide using different agar media. we can detect and enumerate accurately the yeast count, acidic bacteria count, lactic acid count, and including the spoilage yeast and also the wine yeast count. We can also use membrane filtration method coupled with culture plating to do sterility testing. When it's come to rapid detection of spoilage yeast, we have a solution to use PCR. PCR is highly sensitive, specific detection of spoilage yeast. We can take a large sample volume and concentrate it and then use this PCR to do direct detection. You don't have to wait 3 days, 5 days to get result. You can get results within 24 hours. And we also have a quantitative PCR where we can provide the cell count that is equivalent to the CFU count, and that can help us to know the abundance of particular microorganism. And when the strain identification is needed, there is a DNA sequencing method that we can use to identify the spoilage strain. And if you want to know everything, all the microorganisms in a sample, then we can use metagenomics. So the tools are there to provide the data that winemakers will need to help them to do improve the fermentation and improve the quality. This is an example of certificate analysis. So in our report, we will provide information about the method we use, the reporting units, and the method detection limit for the reporting, and then the actual data. For most of chemistry testing, the result is available within 24 hours. For the culture plating, that would depend on the culture incubation time needed. But we work with customer to understand their needs and then choose different tools to provide the information they need. We are in Fremont, not far away from Livermore, probably 12 miles about that. And we welcome you to visit us. We'll be happy to provide the lab tour. Just contact us, send email to the labdata@aeemtek.com. We'll arrange a tour and welcome you to provide us with any feedback of your needs and also comments for improvement. Julie.
Thank you. How to interpret results once you get that lab report. So what we have here at the top of the page is a normal range for wine. I find that really handy to give you some detail about what you're going to see. So using standards to understand the normal range of results is really important. If you get a report, it's really helpful to look at the previous analysis that you got. Say you do something monthly, then it's helpful to do to look back at the analysis you had the prior month. So for example, when you're doing your monitoring of wine while it's aging, you can look at the free sulfur and the VA from the previous month. And so if you see a dramatic change, then you can say, well, maybe I didn't make a sulfur add correctly, or there's some other reason for it, but it allows you to have knowledge from month to month and helps you with that. You can also, for example, you want to look at the alcohol, and you could look at your current alcohol, and then you could also look at, say, pre-filtration versus post-filtration, something like that. It's really helpful to look at the previous analysis when you're interpreting the numbers you have. Use resources that are available to you. So obviously you have the lab itself, but you can also use your fellow wineries that are nearby. There are tons of people that are willing to help you. in Livermore. I'm a consultant, so you can also use me as a resource, but there are lots of different options for resources to help you when you get results that you don't understand. Next slide. So here's our opportunity to answer any questions that people have. So I believe you can unmute yourself and ask questions directly, or if you prefer, you can put them in the Q&A and we will read them out ourselves. And for those that are less comfortable, you can always just contact us directly if you have questions.
Thanks so much, Julie and Florence. We do have some questions that came through. Let me pull some up. And you can also submit your questions in the Q&A, like I said at the bottom there. Okay. The first question is, what is the normal turnaround time for juice testing?
So we use it turnaround within 24 hours. For juice testing, we use instrument which can be done pretty fast. The only thing that can maybe change the turnaround time if we need to rerun, right? Why we need to rerun? Because the instrument used the calibration, internal calibration curve, and to generate standard curve. So the tested value need to be fall into the range. If outside of the range, then we need to retest it. We need to dilute the sample and retest it. So that's the only time that it takes longer, but still usually within 24 hours. For culture method, for example, if for yeast count, if you ask us to use culture method, then we need to wait until the colony grow into detectable size to read the result. So that will take 2 days, 3 days, sometimes even more than that.
So I just saw one question come up on the Q&A, which is how long do you hold samples after testing? So if somebody submits a sample and you've run the analysis, do you hold the sample for a period of time before you dump it out?
Yes, we hold sample in the refrigerator, and we usually clean out after 7 days. But Julie, you can tell me maybe after a certain time the sample is no longer good because changes might occur, right?
I think that 7 days for a wine sample makes perfect sense. For the juice sample, maybe no. You'll know pretty quickly if it started fermenting because you'll see the bubbles. So for juice, I would say we probably do a shorter holding time.
Yeah. We have our schedule. So once a week we'll clean up everything. And the sample holding typically 7 days.
Thank you so much. All right, next question that came through. Will you eventually offer daily pickups for harvest or at least 5 days a week? Also, will you offer a scorpion panel eventually? We cannot. Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, none of the attendees can control their cameras or microphones, so you'll have to just put them in the Q&A here. But yes, the question is, will you eventually offer daily pickups for harvest or at least 5 days a week? And also, will you offer scorpion panel?
For the first question, potentially yes. Right now we work with the Livermore. I think we determined to be 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. But if the community have enough samples, everyday sample, we'd be happy to change that schedule to pick every day. And then the second question, I believe scorpion panel is a PCR panel that another lab have, and they is probably their primary technology. So we don't use that panel. We can use DNA sequencing, the metagenomics to tell you the information you need. So between the qPCR panel and metagenomics, we most likely we can answer your question. I'd be happy to talk to you offline to learn more about your needs.
Fabulous. Thank you, Florence. The next question is, are there differences in results we should look for between whites versus rosé versus reds?
So I guess the biggest question related to that is we're definitely going to see, for example, typically Sauvignon Blanc, the bricks are lower, the pH is lower, the TAs are higher versus, let's say, Chardonnay. So there would be a difference between those two, but there could also be differences between a red wine and a white wine. Rosé kind of behaves more like white wine, so there's a lot of analysis on the rosé side that would be very similar to the whites.
Fabulous. Next question. This may be for Florence. Florence, what's the fastest method for yeast count?
Just direct count. So from the sample, we can treat the sample, basically take, measure the volume and take out the yeast, do microscopy. The advantage of yeast cells is from analytical point of view is they're pretty big under microscope. So you can just count it under microscope the same way you count blood cells. So that's the best way. And with the fluorescence dye, we can tell you, we said the viable yeast count. So it can be done in a few hours if it's really urgent sample, but normally we would say 24 hours.
Okay, excellent. And
I was just going to add one thing.
Sure.
The most frequent time for doing cell counts initially is a lot of people that make sparkling wine do a lot of analysis on yeast cells because they're doing that second fermentation in the bottle. So they're monitoring for that. And secondly, if they're having a problem fermentation, sometimes they'll do cell counts just to understand if things are getting sluggish, if the issue is related to nutrients versus whether it's related to not having enough cells. So those are usually the times we do that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, how do you perform spoilage investigative testing on wine?
So the spoilage testing can have several approach, but by principle is we culture and isolate out bacteria and yeast in the sample, and then we identify them. So that during that process, we will know what's the dominant species, what is likely the cupid in that caused the spoilage. So for each different type of samples, in this case is wine. So because the alcohol content is kind of selective for certain bacteria and yeast. So by doing the enumeration identification, we can help you to find out which one is likely the agent that caused the spoilage.
Thank you, Florence. This one says, when in the winemaking process would you switch from requesting juice versus wine analysis? So I guess when in the process would you choose to do a juice panel versus wine testing, wine analysis?
So I would suggest that during the grape juice, so when you're actually sampling out in the vineyard, or when you have brought the fruit in and you process the fruit and brought it into the winery, that's when you do juice analysis. So that's basically sort of baseline, what have I got in the tank? Then once you've actually started fermentation, and you're doing the bricks and temps, then you can just stick with monitoring it that way. But once you finish the primary and most of the sugar is gone, and now you have a lot more alcohol there, then I would switch to doing the wine analysis. So that would mean you're switching from doing bricks to measuring residual sugar, and you're doing a measurement of the alcohol. The reason it's important is because you're basically conveying to the lab that there's certain parameters that they will need to know. So what do they need to do dilution is basically what I'm asking. So if you are doing that mid-ferment check for alcohol and residual sugar, so you can calculate how much alcohol you have, then you would just let the lab know, because there's so much sugar there that the initial reading would be too high for the analysis to happen. So you would maybe want to have 1 in 10 dilution or 1 in 20 dilution, something like that, because there's so much sugar there. So that's the most important thing, is just to convey to the lab whether you've got a lot of sugar there or other reasons why the numbers might be different than they would expect.
Can I ask you a question, Julie? We can maybe discuss, have an open discuss a
Sure.
little bit. This is kind of a big picture, philosophical question.
Okay,
So
I'm ready.
yeah, let's have a little fun here. So, winemaking is as old as human history, right? And throughout the years, there's traditional winemaking, there's family heritage, and we talk about the magic of wine, how the different flavor, different tastes come into play. There's that. To me, that's kind of a little bit myth, right? Mystery, magic, sacred, crafting, and the rest of the food industry, there's the trend. There is term called precision fermentation. Precision fermentation is you control every aspect of the fermentation to yield the desired quality. So in wine industry, do you see the trend is going to do more of precision fermentation? So you can have year to year, you can have reliable, consistent wine quality, where people grow to love it, right? One example is Coca-Cola. It has so many years following because you want that specific taste. But
so
with
I agree
wine,
with that. So the key here is depends on the size of the winery. So if you make, let's say you make 1 million cases of something, I feel like it's really important to be consistent, so that if you walk into a store and you buy that bottle, that jug bottle, or that box wine, or whatever, or that can of wine, you are going into a grocery store, or you're going into a place, it's available for sale basically in the entire country. And so you're walking into the store and you have bought it before and you're buying it again, and in your mind you think of it as something like Coca-Cola, where you want that consistent flavor profile. So for me, that's somebody like Gallo or somebody really big. They're producing a large amount, and the consumer wants that consistency, so they know I'm buying this thing on the shelf. Whereas if you're a small end producer, or you're a premium producer, there tends to be more of an interest in style variation from vintage to vintage, or from appellation to appellation. So there's more variation, and we actually kind of thrive on that. So people are like, oh, 2024, it's going to be a good vintage. The weather's this. There's there's so many aspects of what the yield was like, or what the weather was like, or, all these variables. And we like to sort of enhance that in a small region with small producers, so that you got to try the 24 versus the 23. And sort of we kind of gain that sort of interest and following because of that variation. So it really depends on what kind of consumer you have. So maybe the price point is different. Maybe that sort of following you have is sort of the curiosity people have for the quality of the wine from vintage to vintage is different. So yeah, it depends. It's the
Thank you.
short version of the answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, the next question that we have is, when we send in samples for something like our port versus our red wine, are there special considerations we need to have?
I kind of brought that up in the previous answer, but so the key for something like a port is it's got a really high alcohol, so it's probably maybe 20% alcohol, somewhere between 18 and 20% alcohol, and it's also got like 20 grams per liter of sugar. So it's got big tannins, it's got lots of alcohol, and it's also very sweet. So when you make a wine like that and you send it in for analysis, it's really important to convey that information to the lab, because it looks like a red wine sample when you send it in, and the people that are analyzing it aren't drinking it, so they don't know that it's got all that alcohol or sugar. So those are the kind of things where the lab would need to dilute it in order to get an accurate number. So it's important to convey to the lab, this is an unusual wine. So keep that in mind when you're running the analysis. So it's nice to be able to tell them this is going to need a 1 to 10 dilution, and then they don't have to run it twice. And so they're not surprised.
Thank you, Julie. I think I appreciate that. We always appreciate clear communication between us with client, and together we get the most accurate result. Any information that can help us to reduce retest or get the number accurate, we really appreciate it.
Okay. The next question is, regarding fermentation health, just because all appears fine and the wine goes dry as it should, does that mean everything is truly okay? No off smell exists. Or for example, in 20 macro bins of cab, one will usually show more volatility in the aromatics. Is there usually room for improvement through analysis, even though all has been consistent for years?
So in that case, if you're seeing that one bin out of 20 is behaving differently, that's where I would do a composite of the other 19 and then individually sample the one bin that's different. And then you can kind of do a side-by-side comparison. Is there something there that looks different? So if you're in the middle of the fermentation, that's where I would look at VA, and I would also look at maybe doing microscopy, because then maybe they see there's some other type of yeast cells that you weren't expecting. So that's probably the biggest way I would look. And in addition, I always think about the sanitation of those bins before you started the ferment. So we'll be looking at ATP swabs and being able to identify that you did a good job cleaning. So that's my first question, is how clean were all those bins when you went in? Because my assumption is the fruit is exactly the same in all 20, but I know that, how the fruit came in and how you crushed it. There's some variation there from the beginning of the vineyard block to the end of the vineyard block, because that's like maybe 10 tons of fruit. So it's more than one row. So there's some variation within the picking of the grapes itself. But once it's already in there, it's hard to check the cleanliness of the bin that you're fermenting in. But I would definitely take a look at, is that one have higher VA? So sometimes even in barrels, where the wine's aging, and there's one that's really different. First test is I would smell it and taste it. But then if I'm still feeling a little bit nervous about that one, because I'm not sure I want to blend it with the other 19, that's when I'll do the VA check or the microbial check, just to make sure that everything's okay.
Excellent. And this is the last question, although I think it might be more of a comment than a question. There's a suggestion to maybe adding a sweet option to check on the labels, I guess for when you submit it to the lab. I think that's what this is talking about,
Okay.
to let the lab know that the wine should be sweeter.
So so what you're saying is not only do you want to have the label that is a sticker on the bottle itself, but I think there's some paperwork you could fill out, and you can always email the lab with that lab data at email address. So if you feel like the information that you want to share is not possible in the format we've given you so far, you can always communicate directly with the lab.
Yeah, exactly. Does anybody have any? Oh, yes. Okay. The answer was yes to that. If there are no more questions, it doesn't look like it. Thank you so much, Florence and Julie. With that, if there are no more questions, I want to thank everyone again for joining us. If you do have anything else that comes to mind, please feel free to shoot an email to lab@aemtek.com, and we'll be sure to get back to you with an answer.